So we should go inside now.
Yes, let's go.
I agree, it's getting a bit chilly.
Okay, follow me.
Now?
We need to discuss the upcoming project deadline.
I agree. We're falling behind schedule.
Did you bring the documents I asked for?
Yes, they're right here in my bag.
We should try to go to the market later today, and I need to get some vegetables for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
Hello, can someone open the door, please? So when you get the plants, they are usually very small.
Yes, very tiny.
Yeah, and then you have to like nurture them.
Yeah.
There's something I need to tell you about what happened yesterday at the market.
So what are your thoughts on the proposal?
I think it has potential, but we need to consider the budget.
I told you about my brother. He went to America.
Yeah.
He's been living there for a few years now.
The morning began with a brittle silence, the kind that does not rest peacefully but instead coils through the air like smoke from a hidden fire, seeping into every breath until words can no longer come gently. The mother-in-law stood stiffly near the doorway, her gaze sharp as a blade, her lips pressed into a thin line that trembled not from weakness but from restrained fury. Across the courtyard, the in-law, weary from work, bent low to gather fallen leaves, her hands trembling from age but still determined, her face etched with effort. Yet every movement she made seemed to ignite suspicion in the mother-in-law's eyes, who muttered under her breath that these gestures were nothing but performances, staged acts meant to lure sympathy from the house owner, a show carefully designed to cast her as a victim deserving pity. The accusation slipped out like venom, sharp, loud enough to wound, and the in-law froze, her back stiffening as if struck by a sudden invisible whip. She turned slowly, her face pale, her hands shaking, her voice quivering with a mixture of hurt and disbelief, and she swore that she had not staged anything, that her stumble earlier was no performance, but a true fall, a moment of weakness when her legs betrayed her. Yet the more she explained, the more the mother-in-law's eyes hardened, and the courtyard seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with unspoken history, with rivalries carried silently through countless small slights and unhealed wounds. The daughter-in-law, caught between these two towering shadows of suspicion and pride, felt the weight press upon her chest like a stone, and though she longed to disappear, to slip away into silence, she knew that doing nothing would allow the storm to swell unchecked until it consumed the fragile balance of their household. She stepped forward, her voice calm but trembling, asking them both to stop, reminding them that harsh words only deepen divides, that sometimes silence itself was sharper than accusations. But neither woman listened fully. Pride had already gripped them, dragging them deeper into the quarrel. The mother-in-law's voice rose again, accusing, insisting that the in-law's fall had been nothing more than a trap, a manipulative act to steal compassion that was not hers to claim. The in-law, her face red now, her body shaking with the humiliation of being doubted, shouted back that no one would humiliate themselves by falling on purpose, that pain was not a stage prop to be flaunted. Their words clashed like steel against steel, sparks flying, and in the middle, the daughter-in-law felt herself drowning, her ears ringing with the sound of two generations tearing at one another. Finally, with her heart pounding and her throat dry, the daughter-in-law declared that she would take over the work, that she would leave the safety of her own tasks and do the chores her mother-in-law was meant to do, so that no further accusations could be flung, no further injuries twisted into daggers. Her words fell heavy into the courtyard, silencing the quarrel for a moment, both older women turning toward her, their eyes wide, surprised that she would sacrifice herself in such a way. She stood tall, though her knees trembled, and insisted that if there must be work, she would bear it. If there must be blame, she would accept it. Anything to end the poisonous exchange that threatened to tear the fragile fabric of their household apart. The mother-in-law scoffed but said nothing more, retreating a step, while the in-law lowered her gaze, ashamed and yet still burning with anger. The daughter-in-law's heart ached, for she loved them both in her own way. Yet she knew that love was not enough to quell suspicion when pride had already set fire to the air. That night, the house carried the echo of their conflict, every shadow stretching longer, every creak in the wooden beams whispering the words that had been shouted earlier. The daughter-in-law lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with the fear that this was only the beginning, that the bitterness between them would grow until no roof could contain it. She clenched her fists, swearing silently that she would find a way to protect the peace, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort, her own place in the delicate web of family. Yet deep down, she wondered if peace was possible at all, when suspicion had already planted its roots so deep. The following morning broke with a deceptive calm, the kind of silence that lingers after a storm, but promises more thunder still to come. And the daughter-in-law rose before the others, her eyes heavy with fatigue yet burning with determination. She tied her hair back tightly, her hands moving with mechanical steadiness as she prepared herself for the work ahead. For today, she would take her mother-in-law's place, not because she sought glory or praise, but because she could no longer bear the venom of yesterday's accusations, poisoning their fragile household. The courtyard smelled faintly of damp earth, the memory of their quarrel still hanging in the air, but she pushed it aside, carrying her tools and her will to the house where the master awaited. The master of the house greeted her with mild surprise, his brows raising as he realized it was not the mother-in-law who had come but the younger woman, her steps steady, her voice polite. He asked why, and she, without hesitation, explained that she had come in her mother-in-law's place, that she wished to help, to work, to silence the whispers of conflict before they grew louder. The master nodded, saying nothing more at first, and directed her toward the tasks awaiting her hands. She bent low, cleaned, repaired, tended, her body moving with precision, each motion efficient, purposeful, the sweat on her brow a silent testimony to her resolve. Hours passed, the sun climbing high, and the master observed her from a distance, noting the diligence, the quiet focus, the refusal to falter even when the work grew heavy. At last, when she had finished one task and turned to the next, he approached, his voice warm but edged with curiosity. He praised her, telling her that the work was done well, far better than expected, her hands skilled, her attitude commendable. A flicker of pride passed through her heart, not for herself, but for the knowledge that she had upheld her family's dignity, that no one could accuse them of idleness or deceit. Yet as the master's words softened, his eyes sharpened, his tone shifting from admiration to warning, he leaned closer, lowering his voice so that no one else might hear, and whispered that she should be wary of her mother-in-law, that the older woman was not as she seemed, that there was deceit hidden behind her smiles, cunning beneath her gestures. He claimed that the fall, the stumble, the tears were all masks worn to draw sympathy, to manipulate hearts, to twist narratives until she alone appeared innocent. The daughter-in-law's chest tightened, her breath catching, for though she had heard such words from her mother-in-law's adversary, hearing them now from the master himself felt like knives carving into her loyalty. She lifted her eyes to his, steady despite the storm inside, and declared that his warning was mistaken, that her mother-in-law was no liar, no deceiver, but a woman of truth, plain and honest, too blunt at times perhaps, but incapable of weaving deceitful webs. She spoke with conviction, her words trembling with both fear and courage, defending the very woman whose pride had nearly torn her apart the day before, because blood and duty demanded that she protect, because love for her family was stronger than the poison of gossip. The master tilted his head, studying her, as though weighing the truth of her words against the certainty of his suspicion. He pressed further, reminding her of the fall, of the strange timing, of the many whispers he had heard from others. But she did not waver. She repeated again that her mother-in-law was genuine, that the world might see tricks where there were none. But she, who lived beside her, knew the truth. Her voice rang out with such force that even she was startled by it. And for a brief moment, silence returned, heavy, suffocating, until the master gave a faint nod, as though conceding, though his eyes still glimmered with doubt. The daughter-in-law left that house with her heart pounding, her hands raw from labor, her back aching from effort, but her spirit blazing with the fire of conviction. She knew the seeds of suspicion had not been erased, that whispers would continue to swirl, that doubt could not be banished by words alone. Yet she also knew that she had stood firm, that she had defended what was hers to defend. But as she walked home beneath the lengthening shadows of dusk, she could not shake the unease that clung to her, the haunting thought that the master's warning might not have been born of malice alone, that perhaps there were truths buried deep she had yet to uncover. Still, she whispered to herself that loyalty was her shield, that trust was her duty, and that whatever storms lay ahead, she would face them not with silence, but with strength. The day seemed to settle into quiet once more, yet quiet in a household where tempers had flared never meant peace, it meant waiting. And the daughter-in-law knew this as she sat with her mother-in-law, hands still sore from the work she had taken on, ears still echoing with the master's unsettling warning. The walls of the house breathed with unease, creaking as though they too had overheard the whispers of deceit. And just as the two women began to settle into the fragile calm, a knock at the door shattered it like glass underfoot. The door opened not with gentleness, but with the impatient push of youth. And into the room stepped the son of the house owner, his presence heavy, his gaze sharp with discontent. His eyes roamed the interior as though searching for flaws, his mouth curving into a frown before words even formed. And at last he spoke, his voice tinged with bitterness, declaring that this house, this grand structure chosen by his father, was not a home, but a hollow shell, too large, too cold, too heavy with expectations it could not fulfill. His words dropped like stones into the silence, each one stirring ripples of discomfort, and the daughter-in-law glanced at her mother-in-law, whose lips pressed tightly as though holding back judgment. The son continued, his complaints flowing like a river released from a dam, saying the rooms were too many, the space too vast for a family that sought warmth rather than grandeur, that his father's choice was misguided, blind even, to what they truly needed. The daughter-in-law listened, her mind turning with each word, for she saw in him not arrogance but frustration, a man caught between respect for his father and the yearning for something simpler, more fitting, more true. She rose slowly, her voice steady though her heart trembled, and suggested that sometimes it takes time to find what is right, that houses, like hearts, must be chosen not in haste but with patience, and that to reject this place did not mean failure, but only a step along the path toward what would one day feel like home. Her mother-in-law, once sharp with suspicion, now softened, her voice surprisingly gentle as she echoed the sentiment, telling the young man that life was not measured by walls of stone, but by the peace they held inside, that perhaps his father's eagerness had led him astray, but in time, the right home would reveal itself. The son looked at them both, his face caught between skepticism and gratitude, and for a long moment he said nothing, as though weighing their words against the heaviness in his chest. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry years of unspoken resentment, He admitted that perhaps he had been too harsh, that perhaps his anger was less about the house and more about the feeling of being unheard, of choices made for him without his voice. The daughter-in-law's heart tightened, for she recognized in his confession the same ache she carried when caught between her mother-in-law and the whispers of others, the ache of being unseen, of fighting for truth that no one else believed. She stepped closer, her eyes soft yet firm, and told him that sometimes families falter, not because love is lacking, but because fear drowns out listening, and that if he could find it in himself to wait, to search again with his father, then perhaps together they could find not just a house, but a true home. He listened, his shoulders easing, his breath slowing, and in his silence she saw that her words had reached him, if only a little. But fate was not finished weaving its threads. As the night deepened and tension softened into weary quiet, the daughter-in-law felt a sudden surge of resolve, a daring thought that rose unbidden but would not be silenced. She turned to the master and his son, her voice low but unwavering, and offered what neither had expected, that they remain here, in her home, under her roof, for as long as they needed while they searched for the place that would truly be theirs. The room fell still, the firelight flickering as if shocked into stillness, and both men stared at her, astonished that one who had so little would offer so much. The master's brows furrowed, his lips parting as though to question, to refuse, but his eyes softened when he saw the sincerity etched into her face. The son, too, blinked in disbelief, his voice faltering as he asked if she truly meant it, if she truly wished to bear the weight of others beneath her already burdened roof. She nodded, her resolve steady, explaining that family is not built only by blood but by the shelter one offers. That kindness was the strongest foundation upon which any house could stand, and that perhaps, in sharing space, in enduring discomfort together, they might find truths and bonds stronger than suspicion or resentment. The master lowered his head, humbled, his voice thick with unexpected gratitude as he accepted, confessing that never before had he felt such generosity from one so young, so seemingly powerless, and that he would not forget it. The son, too, softened, his anger melting into awe, and for the first time since he entered, he smiled, faint but real, a smile that hinted at the possibility of harmony. The mother-in-law watched silently, her eyes glistening, for though she had doubted, though she had accused, though she had clashed with pride, in that moment she saw the strength of the woman who stood between them all, holding together a fragile piece with nothing but courage and compassion. And though she did not speak it aloud, in her heart she whispered that perhaps she had misjudged. Perhaps this daughter-in-law was not just a bridge between generations, but the foundation upon which their fractured family might finally stand. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows as if to remind them that storms still linger, that peace is never guaranteed, but inside the house for that one night, warmth prevailed. They shared a simple meal, their voices calmer, their hearts lighter, and though shadows still lurked at the edges, suspicion still whispered in corners, there was a new bond forged in the fire of conflict and the daring of unexpected kindness. The daughter-in-law sat quietly, watching them eat, her mind weary but her heart steady, knowing that the path ahead would not be free of quarrels or doubts, but also knowing that sometimes it is the smallest act of generosity that shifts the course of entire lives. And so the night closed with firelight dancing on the walls, with gratitude softening once hardened faces, with the promise of tomorrow not free of challenges, but held together by the fragile, unyielding thread of compassion.